Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be listening to On an Island by David Gilmour.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
So originally I was supposed to make this video with Notes Reviews. If you know his YouTube channel, he's so great and he had to say a lot about this album when we were discussing it over on Zoom, but unfortunately the recording was corrupt and I couldn't use it, so I'll have to do this one by myself and he'll join us on the channel at a later date. But anyway, before I get into this, here are some of my favorite bits from this album.
Rusting swings getting higher.
So alas, we have another David Gilmour solo album on here and I'm really happy for it and I'm really looking forward to actually getting to review it. Now, one thing I don't really think I've mentioned on this series quite yet, but when I first randomized the list from an alphabetical order to a random order, I did not really expect what happened with the David Gilmour albums on here, but apparently they were randomized in a chronological order. So we've already reviewed his debut album and then we reviewed About Face and then we kind of reviewed A Momentary Lapse of Reason, which is kind of a solo album by Gilmour, and now we're reviewing his next one, which is On an Island, released in 2006. And talking about when this album was released, it was released, as I said, in 2006, which was a very odd year for prog as a whole, because as a whole prog was definitely at its prime in the 70s, and then you have neo-prog coming out in the 80s, and you somewhat have the reemergence of prog in the 2000s, but more in neo-prog and the darker side. But this one is really something that sticks out of the rest that came in that year. And nobody was really expecting this. It has been 12 years since David Gilmour released anything with Pink Floyd, and let alone in his solo career, and this was kind of a surprise. And calling this one progressive is also kind of an overstatement, because I wouldn't be saying that this one is progressive, but it is mostly spacey and very much having that Gilmour sound. And personally, I really appreciate what Gilmour is doing on this one. Like, I really do love what he does on here, because unlike his first two solo albums, he doesn't try and imitate anyone. He doesn't try and imitate Roger Waters because Roger just released his own solo work. He doesn't try and overshadow anything. He doesn't try to compensate. He just does his thing over here. It's very mature. It's very much well thought, and I really appreciate that. And this album, much like the rest of his solo works, has a lot of contributors on here, a lot of players that come from outside and play on here, and I think it's really lovely. But the thing I really like about this one is that it always feels like a Gilmour album. There's no point in which you feel like any other playing is taking the stage. It really feels like David Gilmour is the one conducting everything that's going on. And some of the people that are on here are just amazing players, amazing singers, just marvelous people in the music community. So we have Graham Nash, we have David Crosby, both of whom known mostly from Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. We have ex-Pink Floyd member Richard Wright on here 2 years before his passing, as well as Phil Manzanera, Robert Wyatt, and so many other talented players. And this album opens up with a track called Castle Horizon. Now this one is really lovely. It's very spacey and very experimental, basically having segments from the entire album put into one very fluid track, which acts as a great opener. But as I've seen countless times already on this list, I don't really tend to judge an album by its first track, because I've seen a lot of bands starting things off with a fantastic track and then just having everything deteriorate as it goes along. So as much as I like this one, I knew that the second track would be more representative of the album, and oh boy was it very representative. The next track is the title track called On an Island. I would have to say that this track specifically is probably my favorite solo David Gilmour track ever. It's better than anything he released, and it's so good. It's so well made, it's so heartfelt, it's so personal. You don't get that a lot, but with this track in particular and with this album as a whole, you really do get a sense of intimacy. And if you thought David Gilmour sounds amazing on his own with his vocals, then you've never heard him on this track in particular, because he has Crosby and Nash both doing harmonies with him, and it sounds mainly just, I would have to say, angelic, if not even godlike. And of course, furthermore, the guitar playing on here is just amazing. It's so good. There's no real point when I think to myself that Gilmour is trying to be, pretentious in any way. It's not like when he was younger and trying to do all these, incredible things on his guitar. This one is very much personal, and it just oozes out emotion with every single note. And as I said already, I feel that this album is really close and personal to him, and I really like that. I think that the fact that there has been quite a time passed since he made anything for himself or with Pink Floyd, and he had time to mature and actually think things over and go about his way of making music and doing what he wants to create, really led up to making an album which is great from start to finish. I really like tracks like Take a Breath or Smile, which is overly very popular. Like, I like it, but I don't get why it's so popular as it is, but still they're really good. And one track that really wowed me was Red Sky at Night, because it has Gilmour himself playing the saxophone on there, and when I discovered it, I was blown away by it, because I had in my mind the fact that, someone else was playing it. Like a lot of Pink Floyd, they have someone from the outside playing the saxophone, but on here Gilmour just gave his own performance, and much like his guitar solos, just emotions oozing out from the way he plays, the way he does things, and it is so freaking good. What I will add is it's not really my type of prog. I really like the, sporadic type of prog, very experimental, very unexpected, but this, I can really appreciate it on a personal level, a very emotional level, and I think everyone who's gonna listen to this one really can stay 100% critical towards it without finding some personal connection to the music found on an Island. So yeah, if you don't know this album quite yet, I will assure you it's definitely something great to experience, and you should totally go ahead and check it out. So a lot of the times on this series, I talk about how covers should match in some way the album that they're going for, should match in some way the album that they're representing. Some bands opt to have some juxtaposition between the cover and the music, and that's completely fine. Some bands just opt to have their own photo on the cover with the title of the album, which to me seems lazy, but it's also something. And then there's some albums which really go ahead and find the best solution, the best imagery to fit the music. And I believe that in this case, this is exactly what is done on here. And I will excuse the fact that this cover wasn't made by the lovely people over at the Hypnosis Studios, but still this one is quite brilliant. I love the beautiful shade of blue used on here. It's just so good. I love the fact that there's the silhouette of Gilmour on this deserted piece of land in the ocean, and then you have the signature birds which will appear in his later works, and all of these things just really drive home how this album feels like, and that's something that's really hard to create. The feeling of the music, the feeling of the overall album in, physical form in a cover is really hard to create, but I think they nailed it quite right on here. Another thing which I really like, of course, is the logo of David Gilmour found on the top, which would of course become his signature logo on the rest of his albums. It's tangible, it looks good, it is very much understandable by any means, and I think it really represents him quite well, and it flows well with how this cover looks. So while I might not connect to this cover on a more personal level in some way, and there are covers which I've seen on here that I just really like for their imagery better, I think this one just really shows its appreciation towards the music found on here, and I am the most grateful person ever when there's a cover that really shows much appreciation towards its music, because I believe that's the only thing that's right to do when you're making an album cover. So when it comes to the rating of this album, I think this one gets an 8 out of 10. It is mostly down to its memorability. I think that it's really, really good. I just don't seem to remember it all that much, and that has to do because it's not my personal cup of prog, but I believe there's many people out there which think this album is perfect, and I honestly really understand why. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to Ambrosia by Ambrosia, their debut album. Yes, the band that has created so many pop songs and so many, rock hits of very, contemporary rock, have apparently created a progressive rock album, and it's definitely quite good. Of course, I want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Wallum. You are the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.